Warning, this video may contain spoilers. In case you've been sleeping under a rock, Pillars of Eternity has come out and it's great. Almost everybody agrees on this point, and regardless of what you think about what I'm about to say in this video, we should all recognize that Obsidian did a good job, at the very least. However, that's not the question I'm going to be addressing in this video. The question I'm going to be addressing is, how does it compare to BioWare's classic Baldur's Gate 2? As Pillars of Eternity is the spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate, there will naturally be comparisons between the two. And this is really very healthy, especially because we're trying to evaluate purchase decisions. One advantage Baldur's Gate 2 had over Pillars of Eternity is that it's a sequel, and therefore the team had more time to work together, on a bigger budget as well. For me, however, it seems to be that it depends on whose writing you prefer. BioWare's or Obsidian. There are other differences, of course, like character customization, itemization, and other topics like companions, but the main point that most people will decide on is writing, and therefore, while I will touch on the other subjects, that's mostly what I want to get across. The first thing I want to talk about is character customization. In Baldur's Gate 2, it had a pretty standard advanced D&D 2nd edition character customization. There was a great variety in races, even though they had a lack of sub-races. The alignment was great for role-playing, but was underused within the game, and a big issue I had with it was that the races to class requirements was very strange. For example, why could I not be a dwarf monk or an elven barbarian? I'm telling you, 10 out of 10 Kelgar Iron Fists would not approve of this restrictive class system. The attribute system, however, was slightly more polished than Pillars, and the only real issue with it is that min-maxing is very easy, and therefore it doesn't allow for much role-playing. Pillars of Eternity brought a new customizable system of role-playing. Admittedly, it's less optimized than D&D, but as time goes on, I'm sure they will find more use for some stats on some characters. Generally, I like the new races, I just wish orcs had made it in. A character can now have low stats in something, but still be okay, and therefore minimum min-maxing is needed. Josh Sawyer has really done a good job pushing his philosophy about not punishing players for role-playing. However, in terms of reputations, I love the concept, and I love how it affects some dialogue. I just wish it had more of an impact on story progression. The reason why I think Pillars of Eternity is better than Baldur's Gate when it comes to character customization is because the races, culture, and background you pick all have an effect on dialogue in some way. Furthermore, reputation, as it builds throughout the game, affects dialogue significantly. Unfortunately, when it comes to Baldur's Gate, these things don't really come up. For example, Baldur's Gate didn't have a background, culture, or reputation system, really. Therefore, there was no variance when you talked to certain NPCs. Race really had no effect on dialogue, and therefore can't really be considered in this comparison. There were some mechanical differences between races that are more significant than the ones in Pillars. The only problem with that is that Pillars had a different philosophy when it comes to character customization. They didn't want to bottleneck any characters and make them unplayable. Baldur's Gate had characters that were unplayable no matter what you did, because they were either overpowered or they were just not good enough. And that shows a major distinction in philosophy, but neither is inherently superior. However, having your character's background affect dialogue is inherently superior to it not, in terms of an RPG. And therefore, I think Pillars of Eternity wins this one. As I said, I don't want to go into itemization too heavily, but I will agree that with the majority of people in the sense that Pillars has many underwhelming items. This is partially due to the fact that the crafting system allows you to make some awesome weapons. There are no Vorpal Blades, there's no Lilikor, there's no Hammers of Thunderbolts. However, I really feel this is a minor point, as having epic weapons is really fun, but it isn't a Diablo-style game. What's important in a game like this is that the blade that you get has a great story, and I'm sorry, but Pillars does have many of those weapons that are unique and have some story behind them. Nonetheless, Baldur's Gate has those and more, and therefore is the clear winner. Let's talk about encounter design. I think Pillars does a decent job in this. For example, I won't spoil the ending, but the final boss is quite satisfying and difficult to kill. Furthermore, some encounters like the Drake encounter in Cad Noir are very thrilling and terrifying when they happen. The tactics aren't generally too complicated, and some adapting must be done based on the situation. And while some people disagree, I think Pillars does have interesting enemies that require different tactics. There are some Zerg attackers, some giant ogres, mages, all at the same time often, and that often makes the priests harder to use. While on the subject, some people found magic underwhelming, but I didn't see this as much. While it's not as good as Baldur's Gate did have a D&D lineage to look back upon. And considering this is completely original, even if it was influenced by D&D as well, it's still pretty good. Now on to Baldur's Gate 2. Baldur's Gate 2 does a great job with encounter design. There are more ambushes, more surprises than in most other games. While Philippe Pepe on RPG Codex did a good job of noting a great example of how disarming traps during combat can be useful during encounter design, let's not pretend Baldur's Gate had all fantastic encounters. Many were just as simple as Pillars are. However, the great ones were great. The magic is based on D&D, so naturally it's going to have a large lineage of spells, and it's fairly standard, so there's not much innovation there. But for all that said, we have to be honest with ourselves. Baldur's Gate had better encounters, they were tougher, they were most of the time more interesting, and I'm sure that Obsidian will do a good job with their next one. Unfortunately, this one has to definitely go to Baldur's Gate. Now we have to go on to the writing, and I'm not quite sure where to begin, but here we go. Baldur's Gate 2 and Pillars of Eternity have very similar concepts, places, and themes. The main distinction, in my opinion, is the differences between the writing of Obsidian and BioWare. I can even see it in the writing of these modern games. Black Isle Studios and Obsidian Entertainment have always been fundamentally different from BioWare. Look at Dragon Age Origins, that fantastic masterpiece, and yes, I think it's a masterpiece. It had a very simplistic story, but the thing that most of us love about the game was how invested we were. We felt the betrayal, we felt like the characters were our friends. Liliana was our lighthearted friend with a dark past. Morgan was this fiercely independent woman who mocks anyone she pleases. Alistair was the well-meaning, reliable one that was a little too silly for his own good. For contrast, Obsidian loves their ideas and concepts. Looking at Fallout New Vegas and Neverwinter Nights 2, we can easily see the grand ideas that they are trying to convey. For example, having listened to Caesar's philosophy many times in Fallout New Vegas, he is a deeper and more convincing villain than in any game I've ever played. In fact, I myself agree with a lot he has to say. Look at Cass. She has sass and a bite. She has her own motivations, and she lets you know it. Neverwinter Nights 2, while not a perfect game, was one where you cared about your companions quite a bit. Nishka and Eleni were always arguing. Bishop had like this flagrant disregard for anyone. But notice the distinction. BioWare's characters are much more fleshed out. They feel like people with a history and a past, while Obsidian's characters feel more like people who are about themselves. This is a difficult concept to explain, so I'll try to do it as clear as I can. Liliana, who has a backstory, opinions, and motivations, and still pretty loyal. She's nice and sweet. Lily from Fallout New Vegas is a nice and sweet character as well, but she has much more of an interesting backstory, and those experiences define her. Her backstory makes her existence believable. But Liliana could be a real person walking down the street. Sure, they may not have crazy bard skills, but the personality could still exist. Now, in Pillars of Eternity, we see this writing shine through. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but we are in a similar situation. People's culture and background define who they are. Sagani is a great example of this, Durance is a great example of this, Alith is a great example of this, and even Kinarua is a great example of this. They are products of their environment, and that's what makes them great. Now contrast this with Emowyn or Jahara. Emowyn is a believable young sister-type character. I mean, she has magic and skills, but honestly, her personality makes her seem like a reasonable person. Jahara is kind of a condescending, motherly type, which we've all experienced in our life. Obviously, there are exceptions to these roles, like Minx or Zar, but contrast the amount of time this proves accurate, and it is startling. When it comes to story, it is again a very different style of writing. Both are high fantasy, with Obsidian being slightly more comedic dark fantasy, and while BioWare addresses some issues, they are nothing like what Obsidian typically addresses. Obsidian addresses slavery, extreme torture, persecution, religious extremism, what it means to be human, etc. Some people may not see all these concepts because Obsidian does their best to make you sympathize with the villains. BioWare might address some of these issues and make you make a decision, but generally, they don't go as deep and rarely are the villains as well thought out. To make a contrast, I would say Obsidian is a cross between Terry Pratchett of Discworld and Joe Abercrombie from Of the Dark Blade itself. Dark and comedic with tons of interesting issues and satire. BioWare is more Tolkien and J.R.R. Martin style of writing. Seemingly real characters with tropes that are done reasonably and well, plus they have some darkness thrown in. Not to mention the epic, personal, military, whatever wars that are simply brilliant in scale and importance. Now, which do you prefer? Let me know in the comment section. Please like and subscribe, and have a nice day.